Hey everyone, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. This is David Geisler with Norm Geisler International Ministry. Many of you had the opportunity tonight to see the movie on nrbtv.org. The movie Norm Geisler, Not Qualified. Tonight we have a special program. I have along with me a bunch of the staff from NGIM, and we're going to have an interesting program tonight. We're going to talk about a number of things, and we want to invite you to share your thoughts about the movie. If you haven't seen it, you can certainly, make comments about anything that we've talked about. But I would definitely love to hear your thoughts on what you thought about the movie. And so let me just kind of introduce our staff. First of all, I have Don Deal. Wave, Don. He's our director of classical apologetic training. And then Brian Henson is our wave. Yeah, there we go. Is our director of youth apologetics. And then Raymond Kwan is our director in Singapore. It's great to have you, Raymond, even though I know it's 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. And then we also have a volunteer who's helping us with Latin American ministries, Roberto Lozano, and I'm not sure if he can join us tonight. But what we would like you to do is to just text us on NGIM Facebook page and share with us any stories. Maybe there were books that you read by Norm Geisler or messages you've heard from him over the years, and it had an impact in your life in some way. And we just want to give you an opportunity to share those stories, and we'll try to talk about that a little bit. We also want to invite you to send us your questions during our event tonight on social media. And specifically, we want to take, as a staff, we want to take some time to talk about some important questions that we think it might be helpful if Christians could answer a little better. And so we're going to talk about some of those things. Guys, to begin our discussion tonight, I would like to just make an observation. I think I've mentioned this to a lot of you, that as I've shown this movie in different places in the US this last year, I have noticed that there are some people that don't understand three of the basic things that my father taught that he learned in his spiritual journey in the 50s and the 60s when he became a Christian and started beginning to understand his faith and beginning to, actually when he started studying Aquinas, and he realized that a lot of the answers to his questions about the Christian faith were in the area of philosophy. And so the thing that surprised me as I shown this movie is that there are still some lay Christians and even some pastors, guys, that don't know some of the basic truths. And I want to talk about this for a moment and get your thoughts on this. Specifically, he believed that all truth was God's truth, area of philosophy, and so he believed that he could find common ground when he witnessed to others. Number two, he believed that faith and reason are more compatible than even many Christians realized. And number three, he understood what the proper use was in using apologetics in our witness to others. And so, I just want to throw out this question to all of you guys, and you can all take some time and share your thoughts with us. Why do you think there's so many Christians, in the US at least, that seem to struggle to understand some of these basic truths that all Christians should know? What do you guys think? Anybody want to share their thoughts?
Sure.
Why do you think that's true?
I'd say, for one thing, it's rarely taught in seminaries anymore. The naturalistic worldview has kind of won the debate. It should not have won. With inferior arguments, it actually has become the top dog. Naturalism being the belief that nature is all there is, or that at least natural processes are all that you can know about. And so when it comes to matters of faith and matters of morality, people, even Christians, have bought into this idea that, well, only direct scientific observation can give me absolute or certain knowledge, whereas matters of faith and morality cannot. And so that became a popular belief, 1800s, and it's not true, but that has become the main worldview or philosophy that we're operating under now. And so I would say that basically Christians have given up the fight. And there's a passage in 1 Samuel 13 where it says that the Israelites could not actually make weapons to fight the Philistines, because the Philistines, when they were in control of the land of Israel, after they colonized and then they took control, they did not allow the Israelites to have blacksmiths, so they could not make weapons. And so the Israelites, it says that if they were going to even go sharpen their tools or farm tools, they had to go to the Philistines to get that done. So I would say in a similar way, those who have the non-Christian or even anti-Christian naturalistic worldview have taken control of our entertainment, of academia, and politics, and they're saying you can't have any weapons to fight. And Christians are going along with this and going, well, we're not allowed to have blacksmiths, and we're not allowed to get involved in politics because there's supposed to be a separation of church and state here in the U.S. That's what some people think that's we're supposed to be operating under. And they also have this separation, not just of politics and religious beliefs, which is not a true separation, but they also think that same separation should be there between faith and reason, and between matters of science and theology. And so there's all these divisions, and like little obedient Israelites under the reign of the Philistines, we won't go get our weapons. We won't have our own blacksmiths. And so I think that Christians, for the most part, have given up the fight.
Yeah.
But we do have seminaries like Veritas or National University and Southern Evangelical Seminary. There's other places as well, like Liberty and Biola, that have not given up the fight. That we are still demonstrating the Christian faith is rational.
Yeah. Raymond, what do you think? Do you think that this is a problem? Do you see this in Singapore as well, in the churches? Do you see that there are Christians that don't understand some of these basic points that we should all know? What is your perspective?
I think what happens in the US resonates with what happens in Singapore. It, not so much on academically, but more culturally, I would think, because Christianity is never a majority in Singapore, and then much of the people in Singapore and in part of Asia, they are brought up in a pluralistic background, and and the church is a pluralistic background, and if Christians are actually not careful of what they actually believe in, and if they don't have a solid ground in apologetics and philosophy or philosophical foundation of Christian faith, their viewpoints will be influenced by pluralistic background. So it's common for you to actually come into Christians and say that I believe in Jesus, but I believe all other religions are true. So I think we need to, have a strong foundation in seminary education to train, pastors or Christian leaders to have a strong philosophical worldview. And because of that difference, many churches took a position that, don't mingle with the world, and we just, keep on to our faith and believe in the Bible, and that's good enough.
What about you, Don? What are your thoughts on why is it that so many Christians don't understand just some basic thoughts about faith and reason, apologetics and evangelism? What What are we doing wrong?
Not everything. That's the positive part. Many Christians have been influenced by a kind of Christian practice that says, just believe and everything will be okay. And that works for them individually until some tragedy hits them. And then they lack the tools to hold on to their faith, and their world crumbles when something bad happens. Because when your simple faith is God's going to make me prosperous or God's going to keep me healthy, and you lose your money, you lose your home, you lose your health, then instead of saying my theology's wrong, many people say my God doesn't exist. And so there's a problem with Christians who simply say just believe, whereas Jesus said at Matthew 22:37, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And we sometimes forget we are to use our minds. And that by using our minds, what we see is that in the West in general, that a trend in thinking called postmodernism has taken root.
Right.
Modernism said that through science and logic, we can work our way through any problem. Well, the problem is they believe that until after World War II and nuclear bombs and the Cold War with Russia and people starving in Africa and other places. And they said, well, we've had this science for a while. We've had this logic for a long time, and we cannot solve the world's problems. So maybe this modernist idea doesn't work. So the people moved beyond, rejected that kind of thinking and said, we need to use our feelings more to determine truth and not logic and not evidence and science and such. So when postmodernism comes in and Christians are influenced by their culture, instead of being salt and light to the culture, it goes the other way many times. We get influenced by thinking that way. And as a result, the church has, by and large, in the past in particular, left the academic world to non-Christians. The Christians have developed kind of a bunker mentality where the whole world's against us. Well, when you leave academia and leave the secular people in charge of education of the youth, well, look around in our society now and the results speak for themselves.
Exactly.
The problem is we as a church didn't listen to Norm's prophetic voice then, but we need to now.
Yes. And one of my observations too, as I've traveled and shown this movie and talked to different people, I really see very clearly that the devil has had a plan to distort the truth that we believe in order to weaken our faith and dilute our witness. And I see this more and more clearly. And I think that when my father discovered some of these things about his faith in the 50s and 60s, that for the most part, the Christian church didn't understand some of those things. The verses that come to mind are like 2 Corinthians 4:4. The God of this world has blinded their minds. Well, that's true of non-believers, but I think it's also true of Christians sometimes. We saw this strategy in the Garden of Eden. Remember what the devil said in Genesis 3:1-5 when he was talking to Eve? He was getting her to believe a half a truth, which is a whole lie, right? And it just seems like that as Christians, we don't always realize so much the spiritual warfare that we are under. And I was surprised when I started showing this movie this last year, talking to different Christian leaders around the country, how many of them still didn't quite understand and had maybe just a more simple, I believe the Bible is the Word of God, and they didn't really go much further than that, and they didn't think it was important to talk about apologetics and why we believe what we believe. So I think we have our work cut out for us to re-equip the body of Christ, to help them understand these simple truths. And I'm really hoping this movie will kind of awaken people. guys, there was one great quote. Well, actually, there was a number of great quotes, but one that stood out to me in the movie was when Dr. Ed Heinzen said this: much of what Norm Geisler wanted to say in the 20th century was really speaking to the 21st century and needs to be heard today just as much as ever before. So my question for you guys is, what parts of this movie still speak to the problems we're facing today, and what should we do about it? Anyone want to share their thoughts? I'm sure we all can say something about that.
Sure. I think that your dad's emphasis on having a complete faith, not simply a fideistic faith, that is a faith that says I just believe, but having a faith that seeks understanding, as the ancients called it. I think that is one of the key takeaways from what your dad said to me, that we need to go beyond simply believing. I mean, number one, as I talked before, you can't handle problems that come up if you haven't thought your way through your faith. Number two, you can't pass it on to your children and the next generation if you haven't thought through your faith. And number three, you can't share it with anybody else. So it affects your life, your future generations, and the world outside and large. If we haven't thought through our faith and what it means, who God is, and we see this all the time with these objections to God's existence, and we who have been through school and studied this roll our eyes at how poorly worded the objections to God is, based on who made God, or how God has to be more complex than any machine ever made, and things that are, we see, you're snickering now because you know that the Christian tradition is so much richer than that it's so much more profound than that these questions have been answered. There's a reason the faith has been around for 2,000 years, and some of the greatest thinkers in history were Christians. Your dad also, the second thing he helped for me was open my eyes to the past. C.S. Lewis used to say you should read 2 old books for every 1 new book, because we can look at the past and we can see the mistakes in their thinking, but we're not seeing the mistakes in our thinking unless we have reference to something outside of our current time. People who only read modern books don't have that outside view and don't know how to criticize their own thinking.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes in the movie also is when Josh McDowell says, if you let inerrancy slip, you let every other doctrine slip intellectually. Guys, talk about this for a second. Obviously, the ICBI conference was a big thing in the 80s and kind of helped us as evangelicals to understand how we should understand the Word of God. But seems like we're still struggling with, trying to understand that in a clear way, or some branches of evangelical Christianity have questions about what the ICBI Council established for evangelical Christians in the 80s. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, and I see it in the chat. Somebody's asking about wrong views of inerrancy and such. The inerrancy is simply put the belief that the Bible does not contain any errors in anything that it's teaching on, or like your dad used to say, any topic that it even touches upon. Right. No errors, whether you're dealing in the area of philosophy, science, history, whatever, no errors at all. And one thing that I would say that I see a lot, because I work with a lot of young people, and we don't have to work with young people to see this happening in our culture, is that a lot of people are abandoning the Christian faith for these social, cultural, moral, political issues. That what happens is they get persuaded by the LGBT movement, and they think, well, the Bible teaches, Jesus said in the beginning, God made them male and female, and that's what marriage is supposed to be. And he also said he made them male and female. Well, that's not popular today. And so a lot of it's not even just young people anymore, but a lot of Americans, they think, well, the Bible teaches that male is male and female is female, and then the man is directed toward having a relationship with a woman. That's how marriage is supposed to be. And they think, well, if the Bible teaches that, that seems like the Bible's teaching hate. And so what happens is they start doing this leftward drift where they start taking a step to the left and they go, well, maybe that part of the Bible is not true, but I still like the other teachings that Jesus has. And then as they start digesting that more, they start thinking, well, if the Bible teaches that it's teaching hate, and then they realize, a lot of my friends are not Christians at all, and they're champions of the whole LGBT movement. And so they start, more and more they go that way, the more they actually stop. At first they may doubt that the Bible is true, that it has errors. And they start thinking, well, it can't be from God if it has errors in it. It shouldn't take very long to figure that out. And then from there, they end up start thinking, well, it teaches something evil and mean and hateful. So they become anti-Christian. And so, but it all starts off with that belief that maybe it's false. And we can argue that the Bible is true, because if it's from God, it has to be true. We can also demonstrate that the contents of it are true. We can give reasons for believing that a male really is a male, that a female really is a female, and that we really are designed to go with each other. That would be what natural law theory teaches. And so I would say not only teaching biblical inerrancy, because your dad obviously taught that, but he also taught the content of it can be backed up with reason.
Right. That's very good. Yeah, we may talk about that in a few minutes. Brian, let me ask you another question. How do we answer the charge? I've heard this before, that extraordinary claims, like Jesus claiming to be God, requires extraordinary evidence. What is it that people are not understanding clearly when they ask a question like that? I've heard you talk about this before. That's why I'm asking.
Right, because it makes for a great internet meme to say something like that. That you'll hear that all the time, and atheists will get really excited, like, "Oh, that's really good," and they'll write that down because extraordinary claims requires extraordinary evidence. All you need to do is start using the David Geisler method of just asking questions. Well, what do you mean by extraordinary claims, extraordinary evidence? Because they don't mean the same thing. It sounds like, oh yeah, that sounds like a really profound thing to say, but when they're actually committing there's several things wrong with this point. First of all, they're committing the equivocation fallacy. The equivocation fallacy is when you use the same word, but you're defining it differently.
Right.
So what do you mean? You want to ask, what do you mean by extraordinary claims?
Right.
Extraordinary claims. You mean that I'm claiming something that's not ordinary, like that something supernatural happened, something rare? That's what they mean when they say extraordinary claims. But then they say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. What do they mean by extraordinary evidence? They don't mean the same thing as they meant from extraordinary claims. Like, do you mean I need supernatural evidence and rare evidence? Because that's probably not what you mean. And so they mean supernatural and rare when they say extraordinary claims. But extraordinary evidence, they mean they want an abundant amount of it. Well, that wouldn't make any sense to say extraordinary claims means an abundant amount of claims. That's not what they mean. And so what they really want is they want better evidence, more convincing is what they mean. And so just because it's worded in it sounds like a little clever way, the two ways doesn't mean the same thing. And so what we would say as Christians is we'd say, well, all the evidence that we have is sufficient evidence. But they want exhaustive evidence. And like we always talk about apologists, the apologetics can actually uncover that the person's real problem is not all the evidence, because I enjoy sitting there and just, unloading all the evidence, and people aren't like, oh, okay, no, I got it. What happens is you end up realizing that the reason why they had their arguments in the first place, the objection in the first place, is because there's something they find unattractive about the Christian faith, whether it's emotional or all of it's volitional, but there's some reason in there that they're rejecting the faith. But all claims, if something is true, it's because it corresponds to reality. And we're obligated to believe it if we have good reasons for it and good evidence. And we have what would be considered sufficient evidence, not exhaustive evidence. Because in a finite world, you can always keep on adding more and more and more evidence. But like we have sufficient evidence that 9/11 occurred. Okay. But it's not exhaustive evidence, because you can always have more people who videoed it. And we still have people who think that, George Bush is behind 9/11 or whatever. You said we have people who are disputing who's even behind 9/11, and I think most of us agree that it happened, and there should be a lot of evidence for that, my point is you can dispute anything. You can dispute the origin of 9/11 or the Gospels or whatever. And so you have to have good reasons, like I was saying, sufficient evidence. So God gives us just enough. He does not give us exhaustive evidence for anything.
Mm-hmm.
If he did, then suddenly there is no choice. I'm obligated to believe because God would then be directly demanding me to believe if he gave me exhaustive evidence.
You mean extraordinary evidence like the universe didn't always exist and came into existence a finite time ago?
Mm.
Yeah, so you could flip it back. You could also say, well, your extraordinary claims are that the universe just explodes into being or something like that. And so you got to give me your extraordinary evidence. So you can play the same game back if you want. At the end of the day, we're stuck with.
No, but what I'm saying is that the beginning of the universe itself is extraordinary evidence that God exists, regardless of whether you believe it happened, 6,000 years ago or 14 billion years ago, whatever your time frame is, it began. And the idea that everything, space, time, matter, energy began, and there is plenty of evidence that it did begin a finite time ago, is extraordinary evidence that God exists, and they reject that as evidence for God.
Yeah. And you could even say that that when it comes to the existence of God, it's easy to get them. I was thinking more in terms of like Richard Carey uses the argument for the resurrection.
Right.
Too much more of that kind of thing. When it comes to the existence of God, oh man, literally every single thing is evidence for God because God is existence and is sustaining the existence of all things. And so, literally, my phone, my hat, my shoes, everything is being sustained by God's existence. So when it comes to God's existence, literally every single thing points directly toward the one that is existence that's sustaining it.
Yeah. Very good. So Don, let me ask you this. I know you were looking at some websites of skeptics and atheists, and you came up with some questions, and one in particular kind of struck me. I thought would be good for you to clarify a little more. Why hasn't God intervened on, this is the way they worded it, why hasn't God intervened on the tyrants throughout history to prevent far worse atrocities than in the Old Testament days in which he did intervene?
I find that question interesting because it is assuming a lot more knowledge than they have. My first thought was, how do you know that he didn't?
Right.
How do you know that God did not prevent tyrants from acting much worse? How do you know that God didn't perform 1,000 major or minor miracles that protected people and stopped other atrocities? How do you know he didn't limit the atrocities through miracles? The answer is the skeptic cannot and don't know, they don't know and cannot know that God has not done that. If it's not recorded in scripture, then we're not always certain ourselves if God did it. But just because I'm not certain and the skeptic isn't certain doesn't prove that God didn't intervene. And my second thought is that God has limited the evil of every tyrant who has ever existed. Pol Pot, Adolf Hitler, you just go through the whole list and you'll discover one thing that they all did. They all died. So the limit on their evil is called death. God's judgment on humankind's sin is death. Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death. By limiting our lives, everyone's lives, to a finite amount of time, God limits the amount of sin that can be done by one person. Imagine if some horrible dictator or person like Adolf Hitler, suppose he had never died and he'd conquered the world and he'd lived for 1,000 years himself. How much evil would he have perpetrated on the world? Well, God stopped it. He died. The theological answer is God does not override free will of individuals. We got to be free to choose evil that we do, or else it's not our responsibility. And the final thing I'd say is the person who asked this, do they really want God to step in whenever evil occurs? Is that really what they're asking? Because the skeptic's idea of what's evil and God's idea of what evil typically don't match. So the question is, what about the evil that you and I do every day? We like to set ourselves up as these little gods, telling everyone that we disagree with that they're wrong. What if God hates abortion and instantly killed every man and woman who got an abortion? All I got to say to the skeptic is be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. And the other thing I think it's helpful to remember, you guys know this, that when you talk about the problem of evil and the focus is on the Christian God, we need to remind people that if a theistic God didn't exist and there was no God, then these questions, who are you talking, who are you complaining to, right? If you're an atheist, and then if you're a pantheist, what's the other problem? If someone believes in a pantheistic God, is evil something actually we can?
Yeah, evil's not even a thing.
Evil's not even real in pantheism.
Yeah.
It's an illusion. It's Maya.
So I think it's important when we're talking to skeptics and they raise all these questions. I use what's called the boomerang principle in conversational evangelism. When they throw these questions at us, let's throw them back and just help them understand that it's only if there's a theistic God that exists that these questions will have a potential to have a meaningful answer. You can't get a meaningful answer if you hold another worldview perspective, right?
Yeah, C.S. Lewis addressed that. He's the one who said you don't know what a crooked line is unless you know what a straight line is.
Yeah.
If God's not the standard for right or wrong, what are we calling right or wrong for the atheists? Is it simply things that inconvenience them? No, they've got an innate sense of justice and right or wrong because they're made in the image of God. They understand certain things are wrong, but from an atheistic worldview, if all we are is as the accidental co-location of atoms, that there's no purpose to us being here, that we just end up here, there's no meaning to life, then the question of evil is meaningless to the atheist as well.
Yep. Hey, Raymond, I want you to share with our audience. When I lived in Singapore, I learned that pluralism is a big problem. It's hard to share your faith when people are pluralist and they think basically all religions are true. So I want you to share with our audience, how can we best remove barriers of pluralism when we talk about Christ, especially in Asia? Why is it important to remove these barriers, and what can we do specifically? What have you done in your conversations with people to help them remove that barrier, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the context of people in Asia, they generally regard themselves as, either they call themselves a free thinker, basically means that they basically embrace everything, because in Singapore is where East meets West, people just match different beliefs, and some of them are more like traditional. They follow their parents or their grandparents to be, a Buddhist, right? So these people comes with a lot of, family commitment and family history in their own personal beliefs. So one key thing to actually help them remove the barrier is not to confront them directly, but actually to learn their story, show a lot of care, and meet them where they are. So one thing that I find it very helpful is to ask provoking questions, to listen to where they are and listen actively to map out what are the worldviews that they are standing at. And that's what I learned from conversational evangelism. Be a musician, hear out where they are. And once we know where they are, then we ask provoking questions to allow them to discover the answer for themselves. Like, for example, free thinker, they will tell you, basically, I believe all religious beliefs are true. And instead of telling them, this is a discrepancy. Basically, Christian believe in one God, and Buddhists believe in many gods, and atheism believe in no God. Then these are wrong, and you are wrong. So it doesn't help in my conversation with people in Singapore, but instead I can find out from them, okay, so now that you believe in A, B, and C, so what do you think? Can they all be true? Christian teach one God, and Buddhism, many of them worship multiple God. And we have some people who are atheists, or they claim that they believe in evolution, they believe in no God, can all be true. So once they provide an answer for themselves, they could not, I mean, they feel committed to the answer and they can see the discrepancy. And from there, then we can move forward a fruitful conversation with people. And for the second type of people, they are more Buddhist and they claim to be believe in traditional Chinese heritage. And again, right, listen to where they are, and I'll try to build bridges using, some of the traditional Chinese belief. For example, like belief in Shangdi. That I'll say, do you know that the ancient Chinese believe in one God, with Shangdi, which one God, and what do you think about that? By allowing them to discover the truth for themselves, I realized that they minimize the defensiveness and be more willing to hear what Christianity have to say. So related to second part of question, basically, I mean, people believe in pluralism. I mean, as what Dr. Geisler said, right? That if a point to in all direction, basically, it's not pointing to anywhere. So true that people in Singapore, if they say that they are free thinker or they are Buddhist, pluralism, they basically believe in nothing. And I just, that when they believe in nothing, then they believe that. So it seems to them that it doesn't matter what they really believe, and it really create a barrier in Christianity. So thinking back, that how we witness to them is to, understand their worldview, start from where they are, and help them move step by step. And of course, through the process, we have to do a lot of prayers and pray for divine appointment so that the person is open and the Holy Spirit can do the work to lead the person step by step towards Christ.
Yeah, amen. Raymond, I remember when I lived in Singapore and I would get into a taxi, it was very rare that I didn't get a opportunity to have a spiritual conversation with the taxi driver, because it was easy somehow to get them to talk about and they will about the religious beliefs, and then they'll say something like, well, all religions are true, or all religions are the same. And then I remember again too what you remember, what my father taught about pluralism, that if all views are true, then nothing is true. A point in every direction is no point at all. If you embrace everything, you stand for nothing. And then here's the other one. If there is no one truth, how can there be any hope? There can't be any hope if there's no one truth. And helping people to understand that can really be powerful. So thank you for sharing that. Hey, Brian, I know you and I have talked about this recently. So this is a question I wanted you to kind of talk a little more about with our audience and help them understand. So let me phrase the question. Can you talk about how our misunderstanding of how we know certain things will impact us so much more than we realize? For example, you and I talked about this, can even impact our identity as male or female. How do we help people to reason properly?
Yeah, so when it comes to, how do we know what we're supposed to be doing, God reveals the moral law, not only in scripture, which is for believers, but God reveals morality to us in human nature itself. That we have what's called these end goals that we're directed toward. Like the end of my eye, the purpose of my eye is for seeing, the purpose of my heart is for pumping blood. But I also am directed toward moral ends, that I'm directed toward the end goal of being alive, of discovering the truth. And also, so we would say the eye is for seeing, my hands are for grabbing things. What is male and female for? It's for something. It's for an end goal. Why did God design us like that? And that means that I would say, we're morally obligated to teach our children that if you're a male, then you are to identify as male. It's the law of identity and logic. The law of identity is A is A, an apple is an apple. How can I tell the difference between a goat and a dog? Well, the law of identity, a goat's a goat and a dog is a dog, is where I start off. It's self-evident, I can tell. Same thing with male and female, that it's self-evident that you have male and female. And so I'm supposed to identify as male. And if my kids, if I have a child who says, if I have a little boy who says, I think I'm a girl, then you would redirect. You wouldn't go, well, then maybe I guess you are a girl. You want to say, I want you to know that God made you a boy, and it's good that you're a boy.
Right.
You know, he made other people girls, and that's good for girls who are girls. But for you, you are a boy. And so we're obligated to do that. So we know that all the studies show that nobody is born with same-sex attraction, and nobody is born with transgender. If you're born that way genetically, it'd be selected. That gene would be selected for extinction. It wouldn't continue on. Plus, the twin studies, identical twin studies, has proven that nobody's born that way because it has to do with conditioning. And a lot of Christians think it's only a matter of choice. Choice plays a role, and so genetics plays a slight role as well. But it's conditioning is the primary culprit here. That if you're in a culture where it permits it, or if you condition somebody to be attracted to the opposite sex or to think that they are a little girl, if you allow a little boy to put on little girl's clothes, or if you have a little girl who's thinks that it's better to be a boy, and or if they're abused, that can also lead to that. And so if you start off with the belief that a boy can be a boy, you're going to be on the wrong path. And so I think that's what's happening in our culture, and we're having parents who are doing that, they think, well, I guess my child, my girl thinks he's a boy. And so instead of encouraging them or redirecting them, they're actually, congratulating them, have these big coming out parties, and at school they're willing to do that. And so I think that should be what's not allowed. And instead it's considered conversion therapy. If you have a little boy who thinks that he's a girl, it's negative, bad conversion therapy. Say, no, you're a boy. But it's good to try to tell the little boy to convert and become a girl when he can't. And so I would say that we're not teaching natural theology or natural law theory in our schools. And you and I have talked about this, that I think there needs to be a complete revolution here. I don't mean an armed insurrection. I mean a revolution in how we think. I think the church needs to completely change how we've been handling things, that we stay out, we're not involved in politics or in education or in entertainment. We've completely given that over. We've decided I'm going to be a good little Israelite and not get my weapons. I'm not going to have any blacksmiths here. It's basically what we're doing in those areas. And I think that in our schools, we should be able to teach natural theology, that the truth about reality is noble, it's objective, and that there is a God. That doesn't mean that we're teaching the Bible. The Bible is for believers. It's for covenant members. So you don't have to teach the Bible in schools, but I think that you can easily get away with teaching. It can't be that you're supposed to teach secularism or naturalism, because that's error. I can't believe that we're morally obligated to teach error. And so I think that we should really think about teaching natural theology, that there really is an infinite uncaused being, that the universe really is intelligible for a reason, because there's an intellect out there that produced it, that humans really are directed towards certain moral ends that we're supposed to be performing, supposed to be directed toward the right to life. They can't be that little babies are both directed toward life, and that the mother is supposed to be giving birth to the child, but also she has the right to then kill the child. That's a contradiction. There is no right to an abortion, neither in natural law or the Bible or in the Constitution. But I think that that's one reason why we do not have a moral society. We don't have a society that can think correctly philosophically. We're starting off with our science incorrectly, assuming that nature is all there is. I think all that could be remedied by teaching some natural law theology, natural theology, and natural law theory.
Yes. So what do we need to do to kind of begin? I guess we got to start talking about it in the churches, right? We got to help people to understand that if we don't re-educate our educators in public schools, our country is in big trouble.
We need Christians that are involved in that are running for office. We need Christians that are getting involved when it comes to school boards, all these things, but we're so far behind.
Right.
That would come later on in the process. I mean, jump into it now, sure, if you think God's calling you to do that. But invite NGIM to your church, have us do a seminar, go online, listen to some of our videos, go to ngim.org, go to Thinkific, enroll in seminary at Veritas or at Southern Evangelical Seminary, because we got to start getting some blacksmiths. Those of you guys who heard me make this metaphor earlier, we need some people who are actually making weapons, because we have superior firepower. There's absolutely no reason why we should be losing this next generation. Absolutely no reason. God has given us all that we need to be equipped to fight this war and to win it. But we need more Davids out there.
Yeah.
Yes, you. But I was also thinking of King David, because David, you are king of evangelism and apologetic conversations. But we need some guys that are willing to go out there and say, if the Philistines are going to let us have any blacksmiths, I'm still going to pick up some stones at least, and I'm going to take down Goliath that way. We got to have people with that attitude of being willing to fight.
So, Brian, one of the things I'm hoping and praying is that with the movie Norm Geisler Not Qualified, then people will be more curious to go deeper. Will study his books, look at our website, see all the things that my father left, and then go to our website, normgeislerthemovie.com, see all the resources that we offer for churches, and then start teaching all these things in their churches. That's, Don, this too. That's my big passion, is that we can get all these resources that you guys have developed and help me to develop and use it in a way that can help the church. So, Don, let me ask you another question. You and I have talked about this a number of times, but I want you to try to say it in as simple language as possible, because it's a difficult question that you and I have talked about before. I want you to answer Lawrence Krauss's. Lawrence Krauss wrote the book. What was the name of the book?
A Universe from Nothing.
Universe from Nothing. But his statement that something, us, can come from nothing. I want you to try to share with our audience, how would we answer a question if someone like Lawrence Krauss or someone who reads his book asks us that kind of question from a skeptic. Why is it that the universe appears to be designed is he says we live in a multi-universe and all that. So touch on all those things.
Sure. And just to be clear, we'll be done about 1 a.m.
Okay.
A little background. His book, A Universe from Nothing, is his attempt to answer one of the oldest questions of mankind, which is, why is there something instead of nothing? And his conclusion is that the reason that question hasn't been answered properly is because theologians and philosophers have been trying to answer it, and only physicists know how to answer anything. He says that theology and philosophy are dead. And he claims that he can demonstrate that the universe can come from nothing. And it's important to understand that the simple answer is Krauss is wrong, right? Because his understanding of nothing, I mean, what was it Aristotle said about nothing? That's what rocks dream about. Right. Nothing, common sense, everyone knows what nothing is. No thing, no nothing, no space, no matter, no nothing. Krauss's definition is the lowest energy state of a system. Well, right in his definition, there's a system already. So he writes that nothing caused the universe. In his case, his nothing, and this is a fancy term, and I'll try not to overuse it, but they're in a reputation by another physicist, because his ideas have not caught on amongst scientists. But he says the nothing that caused the universe are, and here's the mouthful, relativistic quantum field theoretical vacuum states. That's nothing. Well, we need to understand a vacuum state. That part of the phrase refers to a field inside the universe where there are currently no particles.
Mm.
So think about deepest, darkest space. And most of us think of space as empty, but actually space itself is roiling with energy. There's these subatomic fields, there's a field called the Higgs field, which gives mass to objects. There's gravity, there's all sorts of fields, gravitational fields. There's all these fields going through space. And according to quantum theory, particles can pop into existence spontaneously for a short amount of time, and then they go back out. Just the potentials, the energy reaches a certain potential, a particle pops into existence and quickly disappears. They're called virtual particles because no one's ever observed them, but they're a necessary mathematical construct within quantum mechanics, the science of the really small. So a vacuum state, as he said, it would be a situation where there are currently no particles. Here's the problem. He's trying to explain what the book is supposed to be explaining why there is space in the first place. And then he talks about what happens within space.
Mm.
So his book is a failure from the start. And not just me says, as a physicist named David Albert, and I'm going to read this. It gets kind of heavy, but for the people who are scientifically background, they'll understand. I'm not just telling them it's wrong.
Right.
Physicists are telling him it's wrong. And he wrote in his New York Times review of the book, in which he excoriated the book and said it wasn't bad physics, it was bad philosophy disguised as physics. This is his quote: relativistic quantum field theoretical vacuum states, that's what Krauss says created the universe. And so Albert quotes that, says, no less than giraffes or refrigerators or solar systems are particular arrangements of elementary physical stuff. The true relativistic quantum field theoretical equivalent to there not being any physical stuff at all isn't this or that particular arrangement of the fields. What it is, obviously and ineluctably, on the contrary, is the simple absence of the fields. So he's picturing both space and energy fields within the space and saying that nothing created a universe. And when you say that's not a nothing, he says, you're not a physicist, you're not allowed to answer.
Mm.
Well, I'll give here's a simple to explain way to understand it. See my hand? Look at my hand. Uh-oh, a fist just popped into existence. You see that? Oh, it's gone. It's gone. Whoops, a fit. Therefore, there's no hands.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of his reasoning. So his nothing is a something. And you can look at the reviews in the New York Times, Scientific American, and other scientific sources, not well received. Now, you also mentioned about the multiverse. And for those who don't know, the concept this is such a hypothetical idea that there's, I'll give you an example. Brian Greene's a string theorist. It's a type of physicist. He identifies 9 different kinds of multiverses that could exist. We're not going to go into all of them, but most of them are looking at some sort of eternally generating machinery of sorts that creates universes constantly.
Mm.
Well, the problem is they need an explanation because our universe is so perfectly fine-tuned in the physical constants, that is the balance of forces and such. I'll give you one example of how fine-tuned it is. It's called the cosmological constant. That controls how fast the universe expands. That is, if there's too much gravity, everything recollapses. If there's too much repulsive force, everything races apart and nothing can form. So what's the balance between too much gravity pulling together and too much force pushing away? It's balanced on a knife edge of 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. That's orders of magnitude higher than the number of particles in the universe. So to hit that number of exact, perfectly balanced universe, it's the equivalent of shooting at a 1-inch target on the other end of the universe and hitting it on the first try. So in order to explain how perfectly tuned our universe is, some scientists have said, well, we're part of a multiverse. That is, that there's lots of universes, we're just one of them. And I'm not going to get into all the different kinds. The simplest kind is our universe is just so big that we can't see all of it, and there may be regions with different physics in the other part. There's 2 problems with any multiverse. Number one, if the multiverse is true, then you need a fine tuner orders of magnitude greater than the fine tuner for the creation of our universe, because now you got to explain where that machinery came from that produces these multiverses. How perfectly tuned the machinery must be to continually create universes. Number two, if there's a finite number of universes that's been created, then you got to go back to when did it start?
Right.
If there's an infinite number of universes, then you get into all sorts of ridiculous ideas. Any possibility must be in one of those universes. Every possibility has to be realized if there's an infinite number of universes. In other words, there's an infinite number of Don deals in an infinite number of different situations, and my bad luck, if there's an infinite number of multiverses, my bad luck is that I'm stuck in the universe where I'm just a regular guy, because there's at least one universe somewhere where I'm king, have all the power, and everything I ever thought about belonged to me. I just happen to have the rotten luck to live in the universe where I sit in my house and get bored and read books. So it's just in general, we do know our universe has begun. There's tons of evidence for this. Some of my students at Veritas International University had to sit through lectures on why the science believes the universe began. I think I bored Brian with that one time. Well, here's what Christians should say when someone brings up the multiverse to explain the fine-tuning of our universe.
Right.
Ask them, is that a scientific idea? And if they say yes, say, well, if it's science, can you show me the evidence for it? And just to give you a quick heads up of what's going to happen, the answer is they can't.
Right.
It's a mathematical physics idea. And the
Right.
idea is, if the mathematics is correct, it must be true. The problem with that is you get the old problem of rationalism, which is, in the ancient days, if they figured the seven orbs that make up our universe in the old days, the seven spheres, that whole idea, each in that orbits had to be circles, because we know that has to be perfectly, circles are perfect and everything in the heavens must be moving perfectly. Well, those things got disproven by observational evidence. In other words, rationalism, just thinking about things, doesn't prove that they exist in reality. And so mathematical physics may say that there can be a multiverse, but there's no evidence just because you can think of it. It's the equivalent of saying, mathematically, I can conceive of my checking account having $1 billion. Well, just because I can conceive of it doesn't mean it actually has it. So the idea of Lawrence Krauss having demonstrated the universe can begin for nothing, and the reason David brought the book up is because a very prominent atheist, the guy who wrote The God Delusion, what's his name? God Delusion? Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins wrote the foreword to that book, in which he said Lawrence Krauss has put the final nail in the hammer into the coffin of God's existence. Well, nobody except a biologist, and Richard Dawkins isn't even a biologist, he's an ethnologist. He studies animal behavior. Nobody but an ethnologist would possibly believe that this physics book proves anything of the sort. And number two, the multiverse has zero evidence, because they can't even decide what kind of multiverse there could be. So just remember those two things, and you can stay calm when somebody brings those things up.
Very good. So we have maybe just a few more minutes. So let me just share with you guys a thought I have about an important principle my father taught, and let's interact on it for a few minutes. One of the, I think, most important principles in apologetics that my father taught me is this principle. If you can believe the big miracle that God created the universe out of nothing, then you can believe the little miracles. And let me give you one example. A few years ago, I was in Italy and doing some training, and I had this opportunity to talk to this skeptic in the family. And here's the question he asked me. He said, How can you believe the Bible when it was written by so many different people who were imperfect? So now my answer was something like this. Would you agree that if there is a God who can create the universe, that he's powerful enough to ensure that what he wants to communicate reaches us, even through imperfect people? And he said, well, I guess I could see that as more plausible. He wasn't willing to totally agree with me, but I have just found that, that statement, that if you believe the big miracles, you can believe the little miracles, is such an important apologetic principle. And that's why, and I know you guys agree with me, that we have to do a better job of teaching people theistic apologetics. One of the pet peeves I have now with some Christians when they debate atheists or skeptics is they use the first form of the cosmological argument, William Lane Craig's argument, the beginning causality argument, but they don't use the Norm Geisler current or sustaining causality argument. And the problem I have with that is it seems then that it opens up the door to David Hume's criticism of the cosmological argument. So why don't you guys just take a few minutes to share your thoughts on what I said about this? And I think that's one of the reasons that I feel like the Lord is asking me to teach more apologetics, because I'm realizing that all the things that my father taught in the deeper apologetic materials that he developed, that was made for such a time as this. We live in such a skeptical culture now. We need more of Norm Geisler than less. What do you guys think about that?
Of course. And when I teach the existence of God, I always start with the Kalam argument, then I go into the other kinds of cosmology arguments. For those who aren't sure what I'm talking about, the Kalam cosmology argument is, we've kind of been addressing it in here, that if there's everything that has a beginning has a cause, the universe had a beginning, so it had to have a cause. So the argument, and it's a good one, but it's that the universe has not always existed, and it was brought into existence. The Big Bang arguments for the Big Bang support
Right.
that, and the fact that there can't be an infinite regress of moments. Logically, that can't be the case. So if there's a beginning of the universe, that means something was prior to the universe that acted to cause the universe to begin to exist.
Right.
And since the natural universe can't cause itself, it would have to exist first in order to cause itself. So the thing that's prior to the universe is a non-natural being. So that's what we mean by supernatural. It's
Right.
beyond nature. It's not. So the universe beginning to exist can't be a natural act.
Right.
Then what kind of act is it? What kind of event is it? It's got to be a supernatural or non-natural event. And so I remember your dad, the way he explained it was, if you can believe, as the arguments for the Big Bang show, and philosophical arguments the universe had at the beginning, if you can believe that there was no universe, and then the universe began to exist, then you can believe in all the miracles in the Bible, because that would mean if there's no universe and then suddenly there is one,
Right.
that's a supernatural act. So if God can cause the natural universe to come into existence, then that means he can cause water to come into existence.
Right.
If he can cause water to begin to exist, then he can part it, he can
Right.
walk on it, and he can turn it into wine. Because I can try to turn water into wine and walk on it part. But how am I even going to begin to try to bring water into existence? I mean, what are you going to do? Just, how would you even begin? You can't. And from there, then I like to explain, well, if the universe didn't cause itself to begin to exist, that means the universe has nothing to do with its own existence. So why does it exist right now?
Right.
Why doesn't it just slowly just dissolve? Because that means it's doing nothing to cause itself to exist, because it never caused itself to begin. So it has nothing whatsoever to do with its own existence.
Right.
So why does it exist right now? And then you kind of segue then into the what we call the vertical cosmology argument of what's causing the universe to exist right now.
Right.
Because I'm not doing anything to cause my own existence right now. I mean, I eat and drink so my body doesn't die, but why don't I slowly just fade and disappear? I'm not going, stay in existence. But what is? Something else is. It's prior to me, it's beyond me, which means that the kind of back to what you're talking about, David, with David Hume and his sloppy arguments for miracles and causality, that God caused the universe to begin, but he is still in act. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus made this comment where he said, my Father is still working until today.
Right.
He's always in a state of act, going, kind of keeping the universe in existence.
Colossians 1:17. In him, all things hold together.
That's it. And so when you have this pointed out to you, realize all throughout the scriptures, it teaches that God's creator and sustainer. We've ignored the sustainer part for some reason.
I know.
That's our current evidence that God is causing us to exist, which is supernatural, because people are like, where's the evidence for God's supernatural activity? You existing right now. God is supernaturally, not naturally. Nature's not causing you to exist. Nature never caused itself. There's a supernatural cause going, keeping everything in being right now as we speak.
Right. Hey guys, this is a great discussion, but unfortunately we're out of time. I just want to encourage those who are listening to go to the movie website, Norm Geisler, themovie.com. Get Brian's great trifecta materials and use them in your churches. But thanks for joining us tonight, and good night.
All right. Thank you. Good night.